2021-22 budget retreat. I call to order. I need to adopt the agenda.
Moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we proposed annual budget. New business.
Mayor, I'd like to get us started and make it as informal as possible. I've got some things that were left over from the April 21st meeting that I'll need a decision yes or no on as we put the budget together. As you know, we'll meet one more time June 8th, which is a public hearing, as well as your ability to adopt the budget that has to go into effect July 1st. So I kind of need to get the remaining answers together so we can produce the budget and get it ready for consideration. So that's the plan today. I do want to, I was remiss last time. I got to thank staff for putting this budget together. This is my second one with us together. I relied 100% on staff. All the department directors, worked very hard putting this budget together. And as you know, it's very heavy on infrastructure. There's a lot of projects in here, teaming up with the TDA and recreation, public works, police, everything. If this was just a maintenance budget, it would be easy to do. We just sit down in a couple weeks and just add a percentage to what was last year and move on. That's not what this budget is, and I know you realize that. I've got to say thank you to staff for putting it together, and more importantly to our finance officer, Steve Smith. Without him, this wouldn't be on your desk. I could not have produced it. So I've got to thank those people who made it happen. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like to go through 4 sections, if we will. I'd like to talk briefly about revenues, then go to the capital list, make sure everyone's good on the capital that was approved on the 21st. Then I'd like to move to projects and some decisions that we need. We're going to talk about the convenience center, then Sledding Hills, Lake Coffee, and EMS. And then we brought the reason the TV's here is we want to show you the financial model in real time so that you can ask questions, we can do what ifs, we can plug that data in and you can see in real time what that means not only to this budget, to the fees, more importantly moving forward. And Mr. Cheatwood's going to run us through that. Steve and I and Daniel work the model. We're not as slick as Mr. Cheatwood is, so we'll go through that. So without, if that's okay with you, I'd like to go from the budget we gave you on the 21st, and that's the one we gave to the public. It was the second iteration we printed for you. That's the one I have on the screen, and it's the one that the public has. The reason I gave you that is we updated from your decisions on the 21st, and plus that changed some of the page numbers. And if you recall last year, we got mixed up. We were on different pages. So I've got the budget here, and that's the budget we're working from. What is not in there is what we discussed last meeting. So if you review this, you'll find that the COLA and the bonuses still exist. I haven't made those changes, but they've been noted and we've already done the math. In the next printing, we'll have that taken care of. And the fee schedule has not been produced yet that goes with the budget. We'll put that together after today's meeting and you give us some direction on where we go on the fee schedule. So if we could, I'm going to go to page 8 here of revenues. I just want to review it one more time with you to make sure that you don't have any questions and you understand what we've done. Can you make that a little bigger? So we did this so you could see the numbers. I had difficulty with my old eyes looking on the screen, so that's why we put this together. So as I told you last week and in our last review, Our revenues have been figured conservatively. This past budget, as you know, you appropriated $1.7 million out of fund balance to operate the budget we're currently in. And the good news is that we've accomplished all the things you asked us to do, and we did not use all that fund balance. And part of the reason is, I'd like to tell you we did such a great job getting things under budget, and of course we did. But more importantly, our revenues increased in a number of areas that offset that. So when we do a budget, we balance the budget, and when we have additional expenses over actual revenues, we use fund balance to balance the budget, and that was $1.7 million last year. So as additional revenues come in, obviously, we don't take that amount of money out of fund balance, and that's how the actual budget actually works as opposed to the proposed budget. Hopefully that makes sense, and I'm explaining it correctly.
Those funds, the funds that come in unexpected, that goes back into the general fund, correct?
We're talking general fund right now, yes. So we have additional revenue in all of our funds, but we're talking the general fund. So if we have additional sales tax revenue, it goes into the general fund, and it offsets, as we operate the budget, the fund balance that we requested and you approved last year. Same thing happens in the water and sewer and the E911 fund. So we talked about this the last couple meetings, you'll see that our revenue projections were low, which is good, and we've exceeded our revenue in several areas, and as I report to you each month on our finances, you'll see that some revenue streams were 105% over projected. So that's how we make the budget work. We didn't cut anything out that you told us to do. What we had was additional revenue to offset that expenditure, or that use of fund balance. So this year we're in the same position. I'm asking you for, depending on how you calculate it, about $1.865 million out of fund balance to balance the budget for the projects that we have. We budgeted so that to balance the budget, we want you to approve the budget using fund balance, as if our revenue projections are exactly correct. And as we're going to talk today, I'm going to share with you why we think our revenues, particularly in this next budget year, may have a substantial increase. Everybody was around last year when we had the record sales, property sales, home sales, and record, not only was there record number of sales, there was a premium prices were paid. And so Steve has been trying to find out, how that plays into our revenue projections going forward. The important thing is I don't feel comfortable budgeting that. We don't know what the number is. We don't see the tax scroll until September, October. And we want to make sure that you and the public understand that we're not going to calculate that into the budget. But we expect that there's going to be some increase in our revenues based on the record sales that we had. So hopefully that makes sense. So this budget, if you approve it and there's not a dollar additional revenue than what we projected, we're going to use about $1.8 million out of our fund balance. And then for every dollar that comes in additionally in our revenue stream, it'll reduce that dollar out of our fund balance. But for today in this budget, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that's the amount of fund balance we're asking for. And I feel very confident that when we sit here next year, that we'll report the same thing, that our revenues exceeded what we had budgeted.
Chief, when does it throw up a red flag with the state and they maybe question some numbers, or
What was it, at 8%?
8% of?
Yeah, well, we're required to have, I think the law is, and Steve can help me out here, 8% for fund balance of our operating. We well exceed that. And in fact, we had planned not to go below 50%. And we actually, when we talk with David later in the model, we'll show you if you put all the projects that we've talked about in the next several years, we will have a negative fund balance. and what we can do and should do to prevent that from happening. And we'll have a better discussion here in a little bit on the future and what we should keep in fund balance.
So that dollar amount or that percentage well exceeds what the state recommendation is.
Well, it's a state requirement.
Requirement,
Yeah.
sorry, not recommendation, requirement.
Yeah, we're in good financial shape, and that's why we're bringing you these projects, infrastructure projects, is because we've talked about this. This is the time you take the opportunity to do that work, is when you have the funding available. There were times before, and there will be times in the future where we won't have this opportunity for various reasons financially. So what we're trying to do is get our infrastructure on track, get it moving forward while we have the funds to do it with a planning perspective to the future, so that we don't run the fund balance negative or below where we should, and you have some options on how you want to fund some of these bigger projects moving forward.
Did we ever have a set number percentage on our fund balance beyond the state 8%? Was there ever any type of what Beach Mountain felt was a comfortable percentage?
No, I don't think town council's ever set any sort of fund balance policy. Your current fund balance, if I remember correctly, is somewhere around 84% of your yearly expenditure. So, you know, that's nearly a whole year's worth of savings in your operating budget. I don't believe that.
Okay, thank you.
I guess Bob and Steve, the reason our reserves are so healthy is because of the Watauga County sales tax agreement, and that can change year to
Well,
year.
that's part of it, and we're going to talk
Part
about
of it.
sales tax. We can talk about that right now. The sales tax going forward, the agreement with Watauga,
Yes.
the ad valorem versus per capita.
Mhm.
As you know, we were involved in a legal, which is still ongoing, and the town has prevailed. And more importantly, the county commission for this next fiscal year has voted and made the ad valorem continue for the next year. To answer your question, that's part of the reason. We try not to budget those dollars because they can change literally politically.
Yeah.
Those can change. Predominantly, and Steve helped me out here, predominantly I think not only our sales taxes increased, not solely because of the agreement and the way it's distributed. There's been more money in sales tax that's been collected by the state and the county, and then our share of that becomes greater. We would have seen an increase in either methodology. Certainly ad valorem gives us the bigger piece of the pie. But that, on sales tax, it's because there's been more collected, substantially, more collected statewide that has been returned to the counties.
I just thought it was important we all on the council understand why and how the reserves have become healthier.
Well, the reserves have become healthier. One, our ad valorem has gone up each year, our dollars we've collected. I just shared with the mayor today, we're at 99.6% collected. Rebecca has done a phenomenal job.
This is great.
So, you know, for every dollar that comes in that is not appropriated in your budget goes into fund balance. And so similarly, every extra dollar that comes in, we're going to apply it against the fund balance that I'm asking you to approve to balance this budget.
I mean, our tax base has increased, hasn't it?
The tax base has increased steadily over time, maybe a 2.5–3% growth is what we've projected into the models. This particular opportunity, which we experienced last summer, fall, winter with the record sales, it could approach 30% increase. And at first when I heard that, I went, no, that's crazy, but we've confirmed that. In fact, we're going to talk about that later today in the model, where we're going to show you whatever percentage you would like to put in there. We can show you what that will be, and immediately what that does to your fund balance. More importantly, your expenditures going forward. And then we're going to talk about, should we finance some projects, should we pay with cash, should we have a combination of things, because I think it's important as we move forward, everybody has a better understanding on how the town's going to function, not just fiscal year to fiscal year, but how are we going to go out 3, 5, 10 years? So any questions on revenue that I need to talk to you about? Okay. Projects and some decisions I need from you. Let's start with the convenience center. At last council meeting, the mayor asked me to hold off till today to bring that to you. If you recall, at our budget retreat on the 21st, we discussed additional employees, full-time employees to run the convenience center. And you asked me to go back and see if we could remove or reduce full-time new employees by changing the operations of the convenience center. We've done that. Our proposal to you is reduce the days of the week and the hours each day to run the convenience center to 6 days a week, 8 hours per day. And we can save 2 full-time equivalent positions, which equals $88,000 in this budget. If you wish to continue the convenience center 7 days a week, 365, 12 hours a day, I'll need an additional $88,000 into what we've projected for you on the screen. I took your conversation on the 21st, and we've put those numbers into the budget. So we need to have that discussion, or I need to get a decision. Is that what you want us to pursue, or do I need to revamp the numbers? It's 2 full-time positions we would save by changing the hours.
Comments?
I'm in favor of it. I think it's
Kelly?
I'm wondering if it would be better to try and do that seasonal. Would it be better to operate 7 days a week in the winter and in the summer, and then move to 6 days a week when it's slower? Because the amount of renters that we have checking in and out, we could end up with more discussion from them if the center's closed.
Well, just remember that all renters are gonna have to have air proof.
True.
True. And we're gonna be picking up twice a week. And they're not gonna be coming to the convenience center. So they're gonna be strictly pickup.
Yep.
So that should eliminate the renters, number one. Number two, summer is just as busy as the winter. And, you get like April or May, but overall, you just can't plug people in and plug people out. So, Aaron, what do you think?
I'm in favor of the 6 days. I just think we need to make sure that the 2 days that we are open are Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
With people leaving or whatever, but I think we need to save the positions.
We would propose closing on Wednesdays. Daniel has done a study with his group on what our peak days of the week are. Obviously, Saturday, Sunday, Monday are peak. They've determined that Wednesdays would be the best day for lack of traffic to close. So our proposal, it'd be flexible. We could change it to anything we wanted, but Wednesdays is what the recommendation is. 8 hours a day.
Mr. Cardy?
I'm all in favor for it. I think we're doing twice a week pickups, and I don't think it's going to be nearly as congested. And it's a new facility, so it's a good opportunity for new hours.
So you got an unanimous vote on that?
We'll move forward with that, and the budget will
Very good.
reflect that.
So we save 80.
Save $88,000 on 2
$88,000
positions.
I like it.
Off the budget, so that's nice.
The next decision I need is on Sledding Hills. We talked on the 21st about operating 2, closing 1, continuing the old one and doing away with the number 2. And you asked me to bring back some recommendations today. My recommendation is I propose we close Sledding Hill number 1, the original one next to the visitor center permanently. For various reasons. One, this one, number 2, seemed to work out really well. It seemed to operate a little bit safer. We didn't have the congestion that we had on Sledding Hill number 1. I'd like to go in there and remove the infrastructure so that we no longer make snow, have the ability to make snow there. I plan to use a small portion of that for the visitor center expansion, not only for building, but maybe some additional parking on that side. We've got some preliminary plans that I'm not prepared to share. I mean, I don't have them drawn up, but I asked staff to take a look at, what's the best use of that land. Currently, we would make it open space, maybe some for events, some sort of open space event there, and obviously some parking with future use that's undetermined. If that approval suits you, then on Sledding Hill number 2, you've already approved the bathroom, and that's actually, the plans are done and it's going out to bid. We would add additional snowmaking. We would move the snowmaking from 1 to 2, so we'd have double the snowmaking as we had last year. And we've got a number of safety improvements which we have already included in the budget before you to Sledding Hill number 2. As you know, we put that together pretty quickly last year for the COVID response. We need some fencing, barricades to separate the traffic from children sledding. We need some improvements there. So that's what we would do if that is the choice of the council.
What about benches and people to sit and stuff?
We can put benches in, sure.
I'll take these from here that we have, if they're removable.
Aren't they
With the Boy
hay
Scouts
bales?
did,
Yeah,
with the Boy
Yeah.
Scouts building.
yeah. And we can add benches. I mean, that's
Otherwise, they're all standing around, in the middle of the hill.
Does the shed and music go with the?
The new bathroom facility, if you recall, has a
Ticket booth?
room. Ticket booth.
Yeah.
We changed the name of it.
Yeah.
And the music will go, and
Okay.
the attendant structure will go. This attendant building is not in very good shape.
Yeah.
It'll probably not make the trip.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But the facilities, the music, the snowmaking, we want to take that infrastructure out and move
Yeah.
it to Sledding Hill number 2.
Aaron, opinion?
I'm all for this.
Okay.
I have one other question, and I
Sure.
know that was probably brought up last meeting, the land that the sledding hill is on. Is that leased or is that town of Beach Mountain land?
The Sledding Hill belongs to the town. The
Okay.
hill where it resides is on the town. We've leased Mr. Brooks's land just below it and the Brick Oven's land just below that.
Okay,
And we would go back and get a longer-term lease to use those two pieces of property. But the Sledding Hill and all the improvements that the town is going to fund will be on town property.
perfect, thank you.
How long is the lease for?
It's up right now. I've got to renegotiate it.
Well, it's $1 a year, so.
We only made it for the short season because I didn't know what we were going to do. But now I've met with both property owners and they're willing to extend the lease and we're good to go. It has expired.
Do we have a plan in place to stop parking on the other side of the meadows versus parking on the sledding hill? To not move back into the confusion?
Well, therein lies the fence and the safety barriers we're
Okay.
talking about. Where the stone paths have been put in by the resort, that belongs to the elders, and they have an agreement with the resort for overflow parking.
Okay,
So we'll on our property line, we'll put some sort of barrier,
Okay.
possibly a split rail fence, something that looks nice, but something we can separate the two. And then, of course, I've discussed with you the town putting in a parking facility across Water Tank Road on that piece of property. And I think the two combined will solve that problem.
all right, great,
I
thank
think
you.
for safety reasons alone, this is a good thing to do, because it can all be redesigned in conjunction with the building, having everything self-contained and taking the chaos away from the road and away from the town hall,
On the parkway.
from the parkway.
Yeah. My last question on this, I know we discussed last meeting about trying to make Sledding Hill 1 a non-sledding hill in case it snows. Was that part of what was included in here, or is that something that we'll discuss later, or?
Well, I'll bring it back to you if you'd like. My direction to staff was, after we move the infrastructure, make it difficult to sled on when there's natural snow. And one elected official of high importance told me to plant a huge tree in the middle of the sledding hill.
Well, that's, at least we'll stop them
So,
halfway.
it depends on what the future use will be, and obviously we'll bring that back to you. But if it's
Okay.
going to be a function area, a vent area, there was talks about for lack of a better term, a half circular event with to have concerts like an amphitheater or something like that. Some of that hill needs to be pulled down to make that happen. Until we get the visitor center plan in place and we see what we need, it's kind of premature for me to tell you
Okay.
what's going to be there. I don't want it to be sleddable.
Right, well, everybody knows that's the sledding hill, so
Right.
when they come up, that's the first place they're gonna look
Right.
versus two.
I have a question. What if, with the amount of dollars that's been invested in the sledding hill, you know, what if someone came and offered the owners of the property a very lucrative deal to purchase the property? What kind of impact would that have on the sledding hill?
Well, the hill would remain, we would have a shorter sled run. We'd have a shorter run going down. And that's always a concern. You know, the town could entertain, you know, in a lease agreement, having right of first refusal. That's possible and probably doable. So that if that ever came to pass, we would come back to the town and you would then have a decision to make. Do you want the land or do you want them to sell it? Right now, all the investment is on our property, and for the most part, with some minimal incremental expense, it's all been funded by the TDA. The TDA has been really good for us there, and they've seen the need, and they funded it. So it's all been on town property, and it's all pretty much through occupancy tax.
Okay, Jimmy?
I 100% agree, making sledding hill number 2 the permanent sledding hill. There's a running joke about the sledding hill number 1 being called Hamburger Hill for years. So I think for safety reasons, it's necessary. You see thousands of people a year cross the parkway, and it's just extremely dangerous, and you can't get a safe walking path there because of the state. And it makes sense, we're growing the town in that direction with the playground, the park, possibility of a parking lot. So I'm all for it.
Kevin?
I agree. I think we should do it. I agree with Jimmy on the safety concerns because there's been a lot of times, especially on the grade on the sledding hill number 1 versus crossing the parkway. And I think it's great to have that community type center up there that's available, one-stop shopping, which I think is good.
I agree, because it's the way it's setting up.
Well, I've always had mixed feelings about the sledding hill, but there's things that do make sense, and especially from a safety aspect. You know, Hamburger Hill, I don't know, maybe you've been taking pizzas over there and slinging meat or something, I don't know. But, you know, I have some mixed feelings about it, but I will support it.
Great. We spent about TDA spent about $40,000 for that music system on
Yes,
this,
sir.
that we use periodically, you know, whenever we feel that.
Whenever we turn it on,
Yeah. So we're gonna move that,
we are.
okay.
We'll probably use that more often, Mayor. In talking with Sean Royal, Parks and Rec Director, he wants to use that area, Bark Park, bathroom facility, the sledding hill during the summer. Play music, have, outdoor activities there.
Great.
So you won't have to go to Buckeye. Anyway, the point is, I asked that he actually suggested that we get the music system up and running, and you might hear it far more often than you care to.
That's good.
Well, then I won't have to listen to Frank Steele. But, yeah, I'm definitely in favor of it. I think that, and again, like everybody's saying, we seem to be drawing everything to that area. With the playground going up. And then
Park parks.
The bug park, then the bathrooms are going up, so we seem to be drawing everybody that way. Streetscape, so it should only be a natural being, because that's where the sledding
Mushroom
mushrooms are.
trails, I mean, there's a lot.
Right, like a drill.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll move on that. The next one needs some discussion and some direction moving forward. Is the Lake Coffee Reservoir. I think I brought you up to speed on what that is. It's an additional 3 million gallon reservoir that we'd like to consider constructing, combining Lake Coffee, Lake Santas together in a cooperative agreement with the resort. It's time now in the budget to decide what we want to, where we want to move on that. I will tell you that the drought of 2010 was, that was the one that really, put the stake in the ground and said, we've got to do something. So we started on the Watauga, and we started drilling wells, and you know what our success rate is there. This came to us as an additional 3 million gallon reservoir bucket of water that we can use. We can use for drought. We can also use it at any time we want. However, it's basically for drought needs for the town. Where we are is we've got preliminary engineering. We've got the drawings put together. We've run it past the resort. We've gone to the state and the Fish and Wildlife people. We've all got preliminary approval for our conceptual plan. So now the decision needs to be made. Are we going to go forward, and to what level are we willing to go forward in further design, further engineering? We can, of course, stop at any time, but we've got an investment. We have a minimal investment now. Going forward, if you approve it, it will be more of a substantial investment. The funds to engineer this are going to come out of our surface water surcharge that we have on the water bill every month. We used to call it the Watauga River Intake Surcharge, and we changed that. You changed that some months ago to surface water so that it would be more broadly available for expenditures. So what I'm proposing is that we proceed. We're prepared to go out for an RFQ, request for qualifications for an engineering firm to begin the detailed engineering that we'll need to actually get permits to build the thing and get it out to bid to find out how much it'll really cost. We have, shot from the hip, best guess scenario from the engineers, it's $10 million project. And we've plugged it into the model that you'll see in a little bit. We really don't know what the cost is going to be because we haven't reached that plateau of engineering and design where we can get it either a better estimate or actually get it out on the street for some construction costs. So my proposal is we go out for an RFQ, we hire an engineer, and we begin the engineering process to get it, probably 80% engineered so that we can get state Army Corps of Engineers to build this thing. It requires a dam, so it's not something we can just dig a hole in the ground and fill it with water. But if we don't get started, we'll never get down the road. At that point, when we actually have it engineered and permits at least applied for, we'll have a much better idea of what the budget is and how much it costs. Then we'll come back to the council and say, this is where we are, this is what it costs, this is the benefit, this is how it's going to be paid for. So we've talked about it a lot, but now it's time for me to either go forward or take it and put it on the shelf and wait to some other time. I believe we have the funds available without an increase in our let me take that back. We will have the funds available to get started on engineering, but as we go further into the process, the surface water surcharge, and I believe it should fund it, will have to be adjusted as we spend money on this.
How much is in the fund right now?
There's probably, I think it's off the top of my head, and I can go get a number while y'all are talking, but I think it's about $85,000 currently.
And what expenditures have been going out of it?
Very minimal.
Yeah, very.
So we've had that surcharge for the last 3 years,
Yes.
and that's all we've accumulated is 85,000?
Well, that's why I need to go look at it. I got 85 in my head. That may be this year's revenue.
Can you-
Cumulatively, I hesitate to give you off the cuff number. Most of it, I would think. I mean, Yes, what was originally called the Watauga River Intake Surcharge, which started out as $1. All that money is supposed to be earmarked for that project. So whether it is currently sitting unassigned, kind of mysteriously in the utility fund reserves, or whether it's been transferred over into our 85 fund for that project, I'm not sure, but I can get you a number, yeah. I would have to do that now, really.
Because what is it, $3 now a month? $5?
That was five.
It's fine.
Started at $1.
Yeah, I realize that, but we've been accumulating.
It's fine.
That's why I was wondering just how much expenditure has been coming out of the account that we should have such a low amount.
Well, we haven't had much expenditure. We've done some Watauga River work,
Yeah, that I realize.
but that's, and we've drawn drawings for Lake Coffee.
I think we did some engineering, didn't we?
Well, we did engineering on what you've seen on the Lake Coffee.
The
The
wells
wells?
paid with that money though, right?
Were the wells part of it?
How'd you fund the wells?
Some pieces yes and some pieces no. I think it's,
Getting completed.
Well, that's why I asked what the expenditure would be.
Steve will get us that number. That would be the funding source that would pay for the engineering for the Lake Coffee, Lake Santos project.
Okay, opinions wise, getting the number of opinions.
So the question is whether we move forward with starting with the basic part of combining the lakes, the engineering part of it, and then the quote to work off the engineer's drawing and preliminary on what it's going to cost to do it. Is that,
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
I'm just not qualified to talk about this yet because I would like to see a workshop, get a lot more educated on the Lake Coffee Santos project, and then have a sense of direction. And obviously, we're not the council that kicks stuff down the road, so I think we'll need more education on it, or at least I do. This is way
Okay.
over my head personally.
The other thing to think about on this one is we keep it on Beach Mountain. So then we're
Well,
not
that-
under the control
well, that's not
of
cheap.
something out at Watauga River, you know, the river keepers or the commission. We're at least bringing it home.
And the operational expense of the intake.
Yeah.
He educated us last time.
I don't-
Outrageous.
I don't dispute what Jimmy's saying, but the flip side of that is that just operational costs of the Watauga intake project is going to be in excess of $1 million a year, and the town can't sustain that. So let's just say hypothetically that this project is $15 million a year. You know, it's a doable project. I think that the Watauga intake project is not a doable project, especially not at this time, and it's just going to be cost prohibitive to continue to move this project forward. I'm not going to say here's an open checkbook, but I think it's pretty cut and dry that the benefits of pursuing the Lake Coffee project outweigh the intake project at this time. And there's nothing new that's been shared today that hasn't been shared with us over the past couple months. And due to the safety of our residents and visitors and the town, if we go into a drought and or have a fire, it could be catastrophic, and we need to, I think we've had enough time to discuss this, and we need to go ahead and move forward with this project.
As long as it satisfies and does the job of what the intake was going to do. Because Earth sent me an email and they're going to over my head, so
Well,
I don't know.
there are two different sources of water. The Watauga was always designed to be a secondary source of water, and that's what the state wanted us to have, a secondary source of water. And so we currently have surface water, is what Buckeye is considered, and our wells that we're drilling are a second source of water, groundwater. The Watauga River is another second source of water. And we're drilling wells somewhat successfully. The Lake Coffee would not be a secondary source of water. It's another surface water. It's a bucket of water that we're going to be able to take water that now leaves the mountain and save it for a drought operation. Previous councils looked at this, and the engineers came back and said Lake Coffee was not feasible. It wasn't big enough. There wasn't ability to build the reservoir there. And this opportunity did not come up until the resort and the town partnered together to combine their property and our property, their water and our water, and dig a 30 million gallon reservoir. That's the difference. And as I explained to you last time we spoke, and you brought it up today, the operation and maintenance of the two systems are dramatically different. After you build either one, you've got to operate it, and I get it down to the smallest denominator. What's it cost per gallon to get the water up here? The Watauga is probably out of our reach for price per gallon. I don't know that we could, the town would be able to pay that per gallon cost. The Lake Coffee, contrary, is almost identical to Lake Buckeye cost to get the water. We've got to pump it from Coffee over the ridge, the St. Andrews Pine Ridge, and then it's gravity all the way down to the water plant. So if you would think about it, we've got two buckets, Buckeye and Coffee, and a pipe from each one going to the water plant. In the simplest terms, the water plant can open a valve and choose which reservoir to take water out of at substantially less operating costs over time going forward. $1 million a year in energy for the Watauga has been sent to us by the engineers for 60 days worth of water. I didn't do the math yet, but it's a lot. So Lake Coffee, for the 30 million gallons, it's minimal to pump it over the ridge and gravity feed it to the water plant. There's maintenance involved, there's dredging, any water supply is going to have ongoing maintenance. So that alone, it requires us to take a real good hard look at it. Wells are our second source of water, and we're pursuing that. And to my surprise and pleasure, we've done well with the one well that has come in, and we're drilling another one. We're starting it, the road has been built, we're starting it next week, and we hope to have good water there. So if you combine everything together, Buckeye, Coffee, the wells, this appears to be, at least in my opinion, and the engineers, a viable solution to our future water issues, notwithstanding the Watauga.
Does it satisfy the state?
Oh yeah, the state has said, the Lake Coffee thing is that they preliminary have approved it. Fish and Game have preliminary approved it. Army Corps of Engineers has said, get us some engineered documents. They don't approve anything until they see what the dam looks like.
And my other question is, and Dan might know this, Daniel.
Yes.
With what happened last, what was it? January or February? Oh, sorry. I was speaking with you. January or February, when we had the letter come to us about the release of Lake Buckeye, is that something that we should worry about with this project?
No.
No.
No, it would be an off-stream reservoir, so we wouldn't have that downstream requirement to let go. So that would definitely be a separate problem, while at the same time, that 30 million gallons is still there for emergency use, so that we could use that as well to make sure that Buckeye does not have any type of violation, even of those winter times.
Yes, sir.
So and that property, since it's privately owned, doesn't have the same restrictions as what the town has to adhere to with Buckeye, correct?
The big difference is the difference between on-stream and off-stream.
Right.
And it's all about the downstream
Right.
requirement. This one would be built without that downstream release.
Right.
Completely would not have that whatsoever.
My fear would be to spend all this money, get it up and going, and then 10 years down the road, we gotta release all this water because of
We would not, we would not build a Lake Buckeye configuration, notwithstanding what was done in the past. Lake Buckeye, as you know, the creek comes in, Buckeye Creek comes into the lake. It goes, we use out of the bucket, and then we have to release the same amount that comes in down the stream. Coffee would be the bucket that sits on the side of the stream. The stream would go around Lake Coffee. We would never have to release any water out of the bucket, out of Lake Coffee. There wouldn't be a release permit. And what would happen is when we had water flowing, we would fill the reservoir, and then we would use that reservoir. And Daniel had a good point. We could use it all year long to keep us from being in violation at Lake Buckeye. It would be a benefit there. And Buckeye's going to need some maintenance. It's going to need to be dredged. It's filled with silt over the years. The problem we have is, how do we do that and continue making water for the town? If we have another source of water, wells, Watauga, Coffee, we can switch and do the maintenance work on the reservoir. Every reservoir, every well, everything that we do to move water is going to require maintenance, and it has a operational cost. And I don't think those have been taken into consideration as we've looked at solutions. Because it, like I said last meeting, you can write the check for whatever amount you know, big dollars to build the system. We have to operate it. We have to maintain it. And those are where your costs go forever, each year, and they don't get cheaper. So I would be, should I bring the engineer in and have him make a presentation?
I still feel the same. I'm still uncomfortable, you know, so I'd like to see a workshop.
I'd rather keep it on Beach Mountain.
Well, I personally, you want to?
I like to keep it on Beach Mountain as well.
But personally, I think, and I think we threw the ball to Watauga because we didn't have an alternative.
Right.
Sure.
And now we have an alternative. I think Watauga is, if you really want to know the truth, it's a pipe dream.
Sure.
I agree.
Because first of all, it's going to take us 10 years
Right.
to even think about ever getting a drop of water out of it, number one.
Yes, sir.
Number two, we're going to have to fight not only the county, but we're going to have to fight the river people. You know, the last time we tried that, we had over 500 people, or 300, protesting. And the third part is the state now is not going to intervene. And why they're not going to intervene? Because now there's a solution.
And they're on board with
Because
this.
they've always said, they wanted us to find, we had the gentleman from the state here, and his words were, you have to find a solution. That's when we start talking about wells and everything else. So now that we've had a solution, we can't go back to the state and say, we want you to force Watauga to approve it. Because they're gonna say, well, why? You have a solution. Plus, it's gonna cost less to do, and we don't have to go through all this. I mean, we're gonna have to pipe water up for what, 7 miles, 8 miles, if we ever do Watauga? So to me, this is, really and truthfully, is a no-brainer if you really want to know.
I agree.
I
We
agree.
need to move forward.
So as far as the land, is it just kind of a half and half? Because I know part of the lake is privately owned and the other,
Lake Santis is owned by the resort and the surrounding area, and they are willing to enter into a long-term 99-year lease
Okay.
with the town to develop that water source. The agreement would be that they'll lease the land and the water rights. They have the ability to make snow with that water. They need additional water for snow making, and this is the partnership. And we need the additional water for, and they would have water rights in the winter. We would have the water use all year round. And there is a component between the resort and the club. They have an agreement which I haven't been able to get my hands on. No one's been able to find it. They all agree that there's an agreement so that the club can water the golf course from Lake Santis or Coffee. And so that would have to be taken into consideration.
and the engineering documents will include moving that public works building and that road and all
We,
of that.
we would do away with the Public Works building. The pump station for the resort would have to be moved. The pump for the very small pump for the club would have to be moved. We would propose to build this, make it a recreation area
Okay,
with, our dock would be there. We would have a boardwalk around it, and we would look to get some, Part F funds, Parks and Recreation funds, grants to help, offset some of the cost to build it. The point where I'm at now is we've done all the preliminary, little renderings. We either need to hire an engineer and start really doing the engineering, or put it on the shelf.
I think we should go forward.
I say we move forward.
I have one question before. I think before we spend any money on engineering, we need to have the agreement with the resort finalized. I mean, I don't want to go and spend $80,000 on engineering, and then the resort decides, you know what? I'll give you a 10-year lease, and which wouldn't work for us.
Correct.
So I think we have to button that down before we start writing checks for engineering.
Right. I've had talks with Mr. Costin, and he's on board. The issue is, we're not to a point yet where we have decided what gets moved, how it gets moved, and who pays for it all. And so that may take some time, but we can certainly work in that direction. How about the RFQ for an engineer? Can I send that out, or you want me to wait?
No,
We've talked.
that's one.
I agree.
Because that's ready to go, and we can hit the ground running with that. Mayor, Steve Smith brought me some numbers. We currently have $167,500 in reserve, $167,000.
Makes a lot more sense.
We've spent about $57,000 over the last 3 fiscal years.
On Watauga?
Well, it's on surface water. Some of it is this, Daniel has told us some of it has been on engineering for wells and on the Watauga. So we currently have got about $167,000 in reserve.
Okay, I feel better than 85.
Feel better now?
Yes.
We don't have 85?
Yeah.
Okay,
I figured Robin
Thank
was
you.
getting money out of the side or something.
we're on a roll. We'll proceed. EMS station. You had asked me to take a look at that. I brought you the estimated annual costs are going to be about $425,000, whichever county we go to. We haven't negotiated yet, but they've given me some very good numbers. So I think that's in the ballpark that you need to talk about. This will be a full-time dedicated paramedic station on Beach Mountain, dedicated to Beach Mountain. It would be either through the Avery EMS system or the Watauga EMS system. Obviously, response times would be greatly improved. We would have advanced life support on the mountain for our visitors and our residents. We would integrate into the existing system, either Avery or Watauga. There's pros and cons to both. And I'm not prepared to actually bring that to you yet, because we haven't sat down and negotiated. I need to know if this is, if you want us to go that route.
Where would
I'm sorry.
where would the location be?
Well, initially, both wanted us to provide housing. We put them in a fire station, probably Station 2. It's more conducive. Watauga said they would build the station. Avery did not. So, there's some options there. But we would house them, at least initially.
Will the employees be town employees?
No, they would be either Watauga Rescue or Avery County employees. We would enter into a contract with either one of those entities for an annual fee, and we would not have any other obligation other than the contracted price. We would obviously negotiate in that contract similar to what we did with Republic. We would put measurable measurable standards that they would have to meet. Both were asked to propose a dedicated unit, not one that spends its time in Newland or spends its time in Boone, but spends its time here on the mountain. And they did. And that's the numbers that they gave us. The issue is how to pay for it. We don't, as I told you, we don't have, $425,000 sitting in this budget that I can just, pluck out and we can do it. So if this is something you want us to do, I need to know. so that we can, one, build some dollars into the budget and subsequent budgets, and come up with a funding mechanism going forward. The initial year, there's some mountain ambulance, Dr. Murray Miller. He reached out to me. We're meeting next week. He has substantial funding he wishes to make available, not $400,000, maybe a quarter of that. And then there's some other areas where we can look into the budget, particularly as we see what the revenues look like, as we talked about at the beginning of the meeting in October, to see if that's something you want to do. Well, what I need today is this something you want us to pursue, or do you want us to set it on the shelf and come back at another time?
Well, I have a couple questions. Have you talked to the, we have the resort and the club. Have we reached out to them if they're interested in contributing to this?
I have not.
Okay. And if they decide not to, is there a billing process if we have to go to the resort or to the club? I mean,
Well,
we
the
charge $35 an hour, $40 an hour.
Patient pays for that.
The patient
Insurance.
typically pays for the EMS transport. It's usually about $800-900 for a transport, and they pay that through the whatever. In this case, it would be Avery County or Watauga, and I'm sure they've taken that into consideration. They got our call numbers so that they could understand what their revenue streams would be to quote us a number. So I don't think it would be. And I don't think it would meet the federal standards where we could go in and charge a patient for something another entity was providing. But certainly, we can speak to the resort and the club. It's a benefit to both. It's a benefit to our town, our residents. I'll be more than happy to reach out to them.
Would there be, is it feasible to put a charge on the utility bill to help fund this?
EMS?
EMS.
I'd have to talk to town attorney. That I don't know. Yeah, that's way beyond me. I hadn't thought of that. I know we could put it on the ad valorem. We could put an assessment on the tax bill. You know, we have that ability legally to do that. Whether we could connect it to the utility, Daniel, do you know?
Well, it's
I don't know, but I believe that's a
Yeah,
it's just a question.
yeah. Well,
It's a funding, I'm just looking
Yeah.
where we can get a funding source other than we write a check.
Well, on the tax bill, I know you have the authority under the state statute to do that. On the utility bill, I don't know.
Well, can it be added to the tax bill?
I'm sure it can be. You can have an assessment, a fire assessment, EMS assessment on the tax bill. I know you have that authority. I don't know about the utility.
Well, I just use the utility bill. If you look at the tax, I mean, it's something to think about. Because every year, you're gonna have to write a check for at least $250,000 or $300,000.
Yes, yeah, it would be a substantial long-term investment.
Right. So there has to be some kind of funding source to be able
Correct.
to sustain it.
I will talk to the town attorney on what the options are. I can bring that back.
Yeah, I use the utility just as an
Yeah.
example. I mean, if that's not feasible, then can we make an assessment, on the tax bill? I mean, we can have, a public meeting on it, but I'm just saying that we're looking for a way of financing it.
Right. No, that's why I bring it to you at budget time.
Put it in the
How to
model.
pay for it. We can put it in the model very easily.
My question is, when you say they will solely be based on Beach Mountain, how is it staffed, like 24/7?
24/7, it'd be
There's
two
always
paramedics.
somebody- Oh, wow.
It'd be, both systems propose an additional unit as exactly how they do their existing system.
Yes,
So
sir.
Avery would provide an ambulance with two paramedics. Watauga would provide the ambulance with two paramedics. They would be housed here 24/7 and provide EMS covered.
I think it's needed.
I need to
I
learn.
agree.
I think we're there now.
I think with our demographics on who's living up here full-time as well as who's visiting,
I don't think there's a family when, if there is a need, will not understand, I'm sorry, but we may have to wait 45 minutes to an hour to get an ambulance here. I think we're very much there, the need is there, the growth is there, and we have to make the investment.
I've seen firsthand where they've had to wait, patients had to wait 45 minutes to an hour and 13 minutes, and that's unacceptable.
Yes.
But I do, in question of what you said about the resort and the club, just playing devil's advocate about seeing if they want to contribute. You got a lot of folks that go to the sledding hill,
Yeah?
and I'm just, I know we can't do this, I'm just making a point. You got plenty of folks that go to the sledding hill, so if I were the resort or the club, I would say, well, hypothetically, what if the ambulance goes to Brick Oven Pizza?
Yeah.
What if they go to the sledding hill? I think if an entity up here wants to make a in-kind donation, I'm sure it would be acceptable or be welcomed. But say this is one of the stipulations, I don't necessarily agree with that. But I do think that we need to move forward with this. You can't put a price tag on someone's life.
I need to grasp the concept of what's the initial cost, and then what's the reoccurring cost every year?
Well, it would be a contract
Mhm.
cost, similar to, I don't want to use that as an example. It would be a contracted cost, so it would be whatever that system decided to charge us. Right now, it's about $425,000. There's a mix.
Reoccurring or initial?
It's every year.
It's a recurring.
That's an annual cost, and obviously we would enter into an agreement, a contract with either entity, and that cost would be locked in for whatever period that agreement ran, 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
They would want a cost escalator, I'm sure. They would manage the employees. They would be contracting the service. It's an ambulance.
Mhm.
But that would be a reoccurring cost every budget year
Okay.
of about $425,000.
And then say we go with Avery and we have to build the building.
Well, Avery, they did not, we haven't negotiated far enough down the road, and I'm not really ready to bring you an agreement like we did with Republic and say this is what the details are. I got numbers, and they said, we can do it for this amount. We didn't negotiate those numbers. They said this is what, based on your call load and what our labor costs are, this is what we would charge you, and they came in pretty close to each other.
Yes, sir.
To move forward, I would want to enter into negotiations with both of them and come up with an agreement in writing and details, so that we would talk about response times, we would talk about cost escalation, we would talk about housing, those type of things. Put the deals together, see which one is best, bring them to you, and you would take a look at it. What I want you to know today is it's about very close. We're not going to negotiate it down 50%. It's about $425,000 a year to contract for this service for dedicated, put a unit here on Beach Mountain.
I've said I've been in favor of it.
Yeah, I'm on board.
So, okay to move forward and bring some paperwork back to
I
you?
mean, that's the consensus.
Yep.
I just think we have to explore
Yeah.
ways to finance it.
Oh, no, that's number one. Yeah. I don't have the money in this budget to pay for it, and I don't perceive finding money,
Next
about
meeting.
underneath my desk to pay for this. We will have a better idea on what our revenues are this year, like I said, in October. However, this is something you don't enter into lightly. I know you know this, I shouldn't tell you this, but once you start this, you'll never be able to stop it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so we need to understand that it's like putting in a fire truck or putting in a fire department once you start EMS and you justify it by need, it's there's not a group of elected officials who will be able to undo that. So we need to understand that going forward on what those future commitments are.
To get started, would the Reuben Moranian money be available? I know we split it certain ways, but would that be,
It's not available to us. We could certainly ask
to get us
those
set up and get
three
us going?
entities. I know one wouldn't, but it's not available to the town. All right, I
So
will.
since we have two guests at the table, do we need to get their opinion?
No.
Put them in the model.
Well, we will, and exactly that's what we're gonna do,
That's what I'm-
and maybe we can add a project here in a minute, but a $425,000 project, and we'll be able to turn that on, and you can see what that does to your revenues and your reserves. So, can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, now we're to the model. So let me, what I want to do, and the reason we brought this to you is we've talked about it a number of times, and we've been using this model to project the current budget we're in, to take a look at our fees going forward, but more importantly, some of these bigger things we've been talking about, not only today, but in the last several months. So I'm going to introduce David Cheatwood. You've met him before. He's going to run us through this, and he's got, he's going to structure it a little bit. But what I'd like you to do is come up with some what ifs. What if we do an EMS? What if we do the Lake Coffee? What if we do the Watauga? And I want you to see real time, firsthand, what that does to our finances. And then I've asked Mr. Cheatwood to talk to us about funding long-term projects. Obviously, if we need $10 million for coffee or $20 million for Watauga, or we've got a $900,000 fire truck in here. Some of those make sense to finance, some of those make sense to pay cash, some of those make sense maybe to do a general obligation bond. Those are the decisions that you're going to have to, you'll be faced with as we go forward. So without me talking any more about it, you're up. So
All right,
thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me this afternoon. I want to introduce my colleague at the end who's going to be running it while I talk, Chazo Havliston. As you all may recall, presented to you all back at the end of January. Didn't pull up the actual model, but just talked about the functionality of it, showed you a few screenshots and kind of what the purpose of it was. Since that time, we've been working with Daniel and Steve and Bob to fill it out and basically put in historical revenues, and we're focused on your three main funds: your general fund, your water and sewer fund, and your sanitation fund. So we've built out historicals so we can look at trends if we need to, and then what we've done most recently is we've dropped in your fiscal 22 budgeted figures that you're looking at here today and you have been looking at as our starting point. And then on a projection basis going forward, we're using your fiscal 22 budgeted figures as our jumping off point to see, based on certain growth assumptions, how those revenues and expenditures would look going forward. We've also put in your long kind of list of your capital improvement plans, your capital projects out there, some wish list projects as well. You'll see in the model itself, it's an Excel, and hopefully I described this accurately when we talked in January, and you may remember some of this. It's an Excel-based model. There's a lot of functionality in it where you can turn projects on, you can turn them off. If they're off, they're grayed out of the model. If they're on, they'll show up in white. That means they're flowing through and impacting certain ratios that we're focused on. The way we start by building every model is we build your existing debt service in there, so y'all have various installment financings outstanding, and so we've built that in. And what I'm going to do to start, I should say, is I'm going to give you a brief overview, just going through the model in terms of how it's set up and what we're focused on, and then I'm going to do some specific scenarios where I turn some things on, turn them off, so you can see what the impact is. But Chazo, if you go out to the far right, and we always build these models back to front, we have all of your existing debt service loaded up. Not going to go through that, but these are all your different SRF loans and your installment financings, and what fund is paying them: your general fund, your sanitation, your utility. So that's our starting point, because as debt rolls off, we want to know that, because that naturally creates capacity to either layer in new debt or redirect those dollars to operating expenses or otherwise. So we build that out in the back. We then, those three main funds And if you go to your general fund income statement and start at a high level, we are going straight into your audits, historical audits, and we're building out every line item from a revenue and expenditure standpoint, transfers in and out. This is at a very high level, and if you, as Chazo's scrolling down, you'll see those different revenue and expenditure line items. If we quickly, and I'm not going to go through this in detail and get too far into the weeds on it unless you'd like to, but Chazo, if you quickly expand it, what you'll see is that we have each individual subcategory loaded up, just like you see in your budget, just like you see in your audits. And so for all of those, you'll see, and we can, if you unhide Chazo historically, we've got your audited financials so we can look at trends, growth rates there. If you hide those back, we are looking at your fiscal 21. We have some estimates for fiscal 21. We're really just going for this purpose down to the punchline. What do we think will end up going to your fund balance on each of these funds? Because that's going to be our starting point for fund balance for fiscal 2022. We have your budgeted figures in there for 22, and then you'll see everything 23 and later is projected. Under each one of these revenue and expenditure line items, you're going to see that, as Chazo's highlighting, that yellow or orange highlighted tab, that's a growth assumption, and so we can change that year to year. If you all are more comfortable being a little bit more aggressive on growth in the near term, we can dial that up to say 3%, and that will change automatically, flow through the model, and we can do that for every line item. If you slowly scroll down, Chazo, you'll see the different ones on all of your revenue streams out there, and then all of your expenditures as well. Again, salaries, benefits, other services that are out there for your different departments. And so this is trying to give you full functionality to honestly get as into the weeds as you want to. A lot of that into the weeds is coming, talking with Bob and Steve and Daniel about some of those projections. At this point, for growth assumptions, we're pretty high level in terms of 1% growth on both sides. What I'd also note at the front end, since your budgeted figures 2022 is our base year for projections, y'all, like most others, are naturally pretty conservative on your budgeted revenues. And so I would say these projections that we look at are going to be on the conservative side. Once you get more into fiscal 22 and see those revenues start to come in, we would update those and really go from budgeted revenues to maybe more projected or estimated revenues that will give you a truer picture of how fiscal 22 is coming into focus and how that then projects out and benefits you later on. That's the case with the general fund. On the water and sewer fund, you'll see it set up the same way at a high level. We have your operating revenues and your expenditures there. If we unhid those different rows, you'll see we have all the different columns there on both water and sewer revenues coming in and on expenditures, the categories as you see it in your budget and in your audits each and every year with growth assumptions. The one difference on the water and sewer fund is that we have built out your rate structure in here. And this looks a little overwhelming at the start, but what we're focused on, and spent a lot of time with Steve and Daniel on this, just looking at your different customer accounts, different customer classes, whether that's water, residential, in town, out of town, same with sewer, residential, commercial, and then looking at your different rate structure, your base rates, your volumetric rates, consumption. This allows us to go and again change certain assumptions on growth in customer base, growth in rates as well, and we've got some of that built out historically and projected going forward. And then lastly, we have your sanitation fund. It's set up the same way in terms of revenues, expenditures. This is the version where we've got everything showing up with your different growth assumptions on all of those fronts. I want to give you that kind of background. All of that takes us to our dashboard tab, and I'll go back to a couple other tabs here in a second. But Chazo, if you zoom out, I want you to, that's pretty good right there. You're going to see a couple things. That upper left hand area, that is for one of two spots where we can load up certain capital projects. Anything that you're going to finance, we want to load it up on this tab because this has our debt assumptions in there. How long of a repayment term, what sort of interest rate. But you'll see a couple things in there under funding type. There's some functionality. There's a drop-down box there. How are you going to fund that? Is that an SRF loan? Is that a revenue bond, a GO bond, installment financing? And then importantly, what fund are you gonna pay that out of? Is that gonna be your water sewer, general fund, sanitation fund? Those are the ones we're focused on. So anything that's debt funded is on this page. You can also put anything that's expected to be a pay-as-you-go, you would load up here as well. There's one other spot I'll show you in a second where we've loaded up, because y'all have a pretty extensive CIP and we've loaded up every project out there. But what we're focused on when we build this model back to front, we're really spending a lot of time on this tab, because this is where all of our outputs are. So the outputs we're focused on are in the boxes, in those charts at the bottom. We have all the numbers out to the right as well, but the charts are pretty easy to see as we turn things on, what happens. And so the top two charts focused on your general fund, we're looking at year in, year out, what happens from a change in fund balance, really operating revenues versus expenditures and capital. That change in fund balance on the left-hand side will show you, is this a surplus year, a deficit year? If so, how much? You're gonna notice right off the bat, because what we have currently set up in here is your fiscal 22 budgeted figures and your fiscal 22 capital needs. And so you're gonna see a use of fund balance that's gonna tie in, and our number's a little bit higher than what I think is in your budget right now, and we can tick and tie some of these capital projects, but that's the appropriated use of fund balance there, a little bit more than 2 million. I think Bob mentioned about 1.8, but that's where you see that use of fund balance projected or budgeted in fiscal 22. And then you can see what happens from an unassigned fund balance standpoint going forward, and how that works on your general fund, and where that is currently, where it's projected to be. So those top two charts are important from a general fund basis. When we look at your water and sewer, same general thing. We're looking at more, instead of we're calling it fund balance, your cash balance there on water and sewer. How does that change year in, year out? That's the same left-hand chart. And then we convert that water and sewer fund. A lot of banks, lending institutions, public market, credit rating agencies, they convert that dollar amount to days cash on hand, much like you would on your general fund. How many months of operating expenditures do you have? Days cash on hand is something that we're tracking on the water and sewer fund, and then same thing on the sanitation fund. What you'll find that when we turn things on and off, these numbers are going to populate automatically, and so that's why we tend to go to these visuals, because it's quick and easy to see what the impact is. All of the numbers for it, if we scroll up and over, Chazo, you'll see all the numbers out to the right. These are the actual dollar figures that end up populating those charts that you'll see, so we can always go into a number. The way we have our model set up is that if it goes below, some of these are, one of you had asked the question about, do we have a fund balance policy? You don't, but you may want to have a target. And what is that target? What do we need to track going forward? And so we've put in some targets there, some minimum ones. We can adjust those if you like as well, both from a dollar amount and from a percentage standpoint on the general fund and on the water and sewer fund. If it ever goes below that target, and you'll see a scenario too where it does, it'll red flag. It'll tell you you're projected to go below your target in this given fiscal year, and we can see what we can do to fix that. Last thing to point out before we dive into a couple of scenarios on the CIP tab, Chazo, we've got, this is your long list of projects that are out there right now. We have them all. You'll see some are turned on, some are turned off. We've turned everything on that's in your fiscal 22 budget right now. And so if you scroll down, you'll see all of those. We have the fund category. What is that revenue source? Is that a general fund, water, sewer, sanitation? And then we can put this on a horizontal basis. We start with this project because it's quick and easy to drop in your CIP. Some of these projects may be multi-year spends, so we drop that in historically. As I mentioned, anything debt funded, we'd want to bring up to the main dashboard tab so we could load up our projects there, or I'm sorry, our debt assumptions. But what you'll see turned on in the model right now for 2022 is about 2.2 million of pay-go projects. Everything's turned on as pay-go initially to show you on the general fund side. And then you have a couple, about 350 of grant funding, and then 800,000 of water and sewer pay-go, 330 of sanitation fund. So that's what's currently turned on. The way we start all of our models is by turning everything on as pay-as-you-go. If you can do everything pay-go, great, you stop there. If you can still hit your minimum targets that you want to hit, no reason to borrow if you can fund those. But more often than not, we end up looking at, potential funding avenues there for certain projects, especially when we go and turn on some of these ones in fiscal '23 and later.
All right, now, what's the fund balance you're using here right now?
So what we've started with,
Because I see after we spent, we're down to 3.3 million.
sorry, that's your total pay-go. That's your total capital
What's
spend.
left in the fund, what's left in the,
Yep, and so that's a good, let me mention one other thing and I'll go straight to that. The last tab I'll mention operating impacts, because this came up when you're talking about the EMS. This is something we can put in, if you all wanted to put in a hypothetical, fund the EMS stations on a $425,000 a year basis, we can type this in here, turn a project on just to show that, Chazzo, because I think we'll end up looking at that scenario. Just say EMS operations out of your general fund, it's an operating expense.
Correct.
We can look at revenues, but to offset that, but $425,000 a year, and let's have that start in 2023, and let's say it just goes out for a good long while. When you go back to your general fund tab, what we're going to find now is that we're going to have a line item there for under your expense component for that $425,000. And so that's now populating, and so you can see what happens if you all said no other revenue source coming in, we just have $425,000 in expense. Can our general fund support that? You'll see the answer is no, it can't on a going forward basis with that big of a number. But, and it's showing up there now because it's turned on. If we went in and turned it back off, it's now going to go, it will gray out, therefore not flowing through the model anymore. But what we can then look at is other revenue sources. If you can get some contributions from other entities in the town, then we can show those revenues coming in. If you wanted to look at a fee, how much that could bring in each year, and therefore how much could just the general fund operating support what's left over. And so those are all scenarios that this model is designed to be able to track and show you.
I'd have to tell you what amount fee, or can the model tell me what fee should be charged?
In terms of how it should be charged, I mean, we can show you based on, if you have other funding sources coming in for that annual 425 and we're left trying to fund $300,000, we're focused on you need $300,000. How that gets, the model's not going to say, what does that mean per, if you put it on your property tax bill per property tax payer, but that's something we can look at and get back to you on. It'll just look at total dollars, here's what you need coming in.
What's coming out?
Yeah. So to your point on the general fund, and so, Chazzo, go to the general fund, yeah, you're on that. Go down to our fund balance and let's look at kind of where we are. Y'all, as you know, have a couple different components to your fund balance. Unassigned is the main one we're focused on here. And what we are showing is that, at the end of this year, you would have about 4.6 million in unassigned fund balance. That assumes that you are appropriating 2.5 million or 2.4 million for this next year's budget. And so that's the 2,463,000. Again, I think I heard Bob say it was going to be around 1.8. So we may have some capital turned on that's not in this one. But right now, again, absent that appropriation, you'd have close to $7 million in unassigned. You're taking 1.8 or 2.4 of that and appropriating that for next year's budget. Assuming you had to spend all of that, you'd be left with about $4.7 million at the end of 2022. And so that's the number that we're starting with or focused on for what you'd be left with. And so when we look at funding some of these other projects, we're assuming you use all of the $2 million that you appropriate. As you heard Bob say, that's not likely. That's not what you've done before. So there's a lot of conservatism built into this model. But if you did, you'd be left with 4.6 million, which is still 50% of your general fund operating expenditures, which is a really strong number. And then when we turn on some of these other projects, you'll see how that would eat into that. If you just looked at no other projects being turned on, you'll see your unassigned fund balance dropping a little bit each year. That's just because right now, operating expenditures are projected at a little bit higher level than operating revenues. Conservatism built in, and that's how I think some of that in your fiscal 22 budget as well. If we look at different growth assumptions on those revenue streams, particularly on the property tax side, you'll see how that drastically changes the picture. But this is really our first scenario. If you funded everything in there, all of that, I think it was around 2.2 million of capital this year, going back to our dashboard tab, you're left, and actually looking at the numbers is fine there, you're left in 2022 with about $4.6 million, $4.7 million. It stays at that level, that slight decline because of the mismatch in operating revenues versus expenses right now, but it stays at a very strong level over the next few years, certainly above any sort of minimum. Right now, just for starters, we had $1 million as your minimum fund balance. I think in 10%, the bare minimum is 8%. Ideally, you'd want something a little bit higher. When most entities ask what a good minimum is, I would say 25% is a good minimum. If you looked at some of your peers across the state, you'll see something north of 25%, more like 40%. And so that's where where you are at 50% is a good number. Going back to the local government commission, while 8% is your bare minimum, if you start spending that down and down, certainly for operating versus capital, you may start to get hey, heads up, we see this going down, you're falling below some of your peers out there. You're not at the bare minimum 8%, but you're on a downward decline. Hey, what are you spending that on? Is that operations? If so, we encourage you to correct that, but that's something that we can. So Chaz, if you change that, for instance, just to show you how this works, to 60%, you'll see a couple red flag years. If we put it at 25% and left it there, that's something that those red flag goes away. And so we can look at those on a going forward basis. And if y'all going forward wanted to develop a policy, we can give you some examples and you can think about how you'd want to do that. On your water and sewer fund, same thing, we've got a minimum $500,000 as a bare minimum you'd want in there. That's also 180 days, and against these two, as I'm looking at it, really should align as to what those two are. 500,000 is not 180 days, but 180 days, obviously 6 months cash on hand. That's also a good figure. If someone said, what's a good starting point? I'd say a bare minimum there would be 120 days. You're gonna see, using your fiscal 22 budgeted revenues, I should note, and you'll have in your budget a 3.5% increase in your base rate on water and sewer side. That's captured in here because we're using your fiscal 22 budgeted revenues. With that capital outlay of 800,000 turned on, you would drop from about 1.4 million down to around $600,000 in terms of days cash on hand. That's about 120 days or 4 months or so. Again, getting pretty narrow on that given where you've been. And so what I'd like to do is run through 2 or 3 scenarios and show you what would happen if you fund additional projects outside of fiscal 22 and kind of ways to address that. But before I do that, I guess let me pause. Any questions on what we currently have set up, which is really just targeting your fiscal 22 revenues, expenditures, capital needs, and appropriated fund balance and things like that? Okay. So what we would do in terms of our first scenario, if we turn everything on outside or after fiscal 22, and happy to go through any of these projects that you'd like. You'll see there's a long list of them, and so we can show you what's turned on out there. But Chaz, if you slowly kind of scroll out and over, or maybe, yeah, actually that's a good number. We have things turned on through fiscal 25, and so this is over the next several years. Different amounts. Some of these are on an annual basis. Others are just more one-time needs in a given year. You'll see the various listing of projects out there. Scrolling all the way down, it's got water and sewer, sanitation. You'll see on your general fund, in 2023, what is currently turned on is about $2.7 million. 2024, $2.5 million, and then it gets lighter in 25 and 26. Just don't have projects out there right now. And then on your water and sewer side, you'll see about $315,000 next year, and then a couple $100,000 the next few years thereafter. If you scroll out a little bit more, do we have that? So we don't have that reservoir project turned on yet, but we can. And so if you did everything here, your revenues projected to grow at 1%, your expenses projected to grow at 1%, and your starting fund balances as we've looked at. If we go back to your dashboard tab, what you will find is, and starting on your general fund out to the left, that can't support that. You can't pay $2.5 million out of fund balance each year when your starting point is close to $5 million. And so there's, so that's obviously not sustainable to do all of that. So there's a couple of different ways to address it. The first is you increase revenues in some form or fashion. That can be natural growth in your tax base, and we can talk about a revaluation year and what that does. I'll show you that in a second. Another scenario would be just an increase in your tax rate. So again, focused on the revenue side. You can also focus on the other side of the ledger where you can cut certain expenditures if that's possible. On the capital side, we can go back to that CIP tab and push projects out. We can lower amounts. We can stagger it over a certain number of years so we can play with the capital amounts as well. We can turn projects back off. So that will solve it. But it's really going to be revenues, expenditures, or capital adjustments to make that picture look prettier. The first one, and let's focus on the general fund for a second. The first way to do it would be with the a growth in your, with a reassessment, with a revaluation year coming up. If we showed a one-time increase in your property tax revenues, instead of just 1%, let's grow that by 30%. And so let's say you keep your tax rate exactly the same as you have it now, and you get to realize all 30% of that increase with a reval coming up. If I go back, so as you saw Chazo change from 1% to a one-time 30%, and then back to more of a natural growth of 1% per year. If we go back to your dashboard tab, that alone solves a lot of the problem. It doesn't get you all the way there because you are still going down. You're still funding a good bit of capital each and every year. But at your lowest point in fiscal 24, you'd be around 1.75 million, which would be about 20% of your total general fund expenditures. So certainly a decline from that $4.7 million number, and that's something where you all may look at that and say that, I'm comfortable with that. That's because of capital. We want to fund those capital needs, and I'm comfortable going down to 20%. You may look at that and say, I'm not comfortable going down that low. We've been much, much higher over the years. And so this is where, and the benefit of the model and hopefully how the town uses it going forward is, this is again based off of conservative numbers based on your fiscal 22 budget. If you all don't need to use all of that $2 million in fund balance, well, that's automatically going to jump up your starting point. If your revenues, your sales tax revenues come in higher than projected, and all of this has been the norm, as you heard Bob say, y'all have come in better on revenues and expenditures, which has enabled you to not dip into your fund balance certainly as much as you project on the front end. That's going to solve a lot of it. And so this is not something where today you have to say, yep, we're going to increase taxes in fiscal 24 to adjust that. You're going to monitor this during the year as you start your budget process to say, you know what, fiscal 22, if we fast forward 6 months, we've got some good numbers in. That 4.6 million is looking more like 4.9 million or 5.2, whatever the number is. And on a projected basis going forward with some of these revenue streams, we feel better about projecting a little bit more aggressively on those growth assumptions, and that's going to clean up a lot of what's there. But the purpose of this model is to project out and at least give you a heads up going forward. If those revenues maybe don't materialize, there will be a decision point on, do I defer some of this capital, not do it, or do I increase taxes? And certainly on with the revaluation, do you hold your tax rate the same and capture all of that? Do you, the other option is going to revenue neutral, which basically puts you back in the same spot. You may decrease your tax rate. You realize the increase in assessed value, and it gets you to the same revenue number, and then there's anywhere in between.
What would be interesting to see is with this model is with the fund balances as a percentage of the expenditures and comparing that to the lowest it's ever been on, and I don't know how far back you can go with that information and how far you can plug it in, but trying to decide where the happy medium is where the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures needs to be.
Right.
How low can you go? Does it need to be at 20%, or for it to remain healthy? Does it need to be at, 62%? And then look at when it got down to, say, 18%, and you're looking at 1.7 million, and that maybe is too low, and looking at your revenues versus the expenditures of that year, compare that to a year to try to establish a baseline of where the fund balance needs to be as a percentage. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, that historical data, I think we have 5 years going back, and we can pull it going even further back. I think that's helpful to look at. I think, having a more serious conversation about putting a policy in place, and so you've got, going into it, you have some parameters around the minimum you're comfortable with, could also be a good idea. And
Because if your revenues drop, you need to establish a baseline on how far you can go before it becomes unhealthy
right.
for the town, and how long you can sustain it.
And I think looking at your history and also some of your peers around the state, that have similar, whether it's population, proximity, or other services that are provided, so making sure you have a good peers and looking at what their fund balances are, if they have policies. The local government commission has some good data out there that'll group you based on population and show you how you stack up to those, and that's where you can use all of that data to come up with. And I can say also, it can be an informal policy or informal target that you all have as a group. Say, hey, let's try to target a minimum of 25% or 40%, whatever the figure is. Y'all can come up with that and think about that. But there's good data and resources out there that we can show you and say, here's how you stack up. Because I don't think y'all have had a very high fund balance, upwards of unassigned fund balance, 80% or so. Even though, going down to 25% may be fine if you looked at it in isolation, that's a pretty steep decline from where you were, and that you may not be comfortable with that given your history. And so it's trying to strike the balance between what your historical levels have been and then what some of your peers are out there and other.
So if you used, you were talking about population comparable to whatever town, would you be able to use a comparable tax base?
Yeah, I think there's different, and we can pull, whether it's based on population, tax base, or again, proximity, because your population and who y'all serve may not be similar to another population that's just in the Piedmont region and, doesn't have the level of tourism and other things. And so we can try to get some, with y'all's input, some good peers out there to see what others are doing and what others have in terms of unassigned fund balance. I would, just from the outside looking in here and looking at that projection, I would tell you, to me, that's too low to go, kind of given where you've been. Even though 18% in isolation, may be fine, I would think you would want a little bit higher level there. There's I see a lot of different policies out there. Some may have a minimum and a target, so you can't go below this, but we're going to target something higher. I've seen others where they may have a minimum, and anything above that minimum gets put into a capital reserve fund to help you fund projects going forward as well. So if you have a really good year, you can move some of that out of unassigned into a capital projects fund for other projects. And so there's a lot of different ways to do it. Again, we can share different examples with Bob and Steve.
18% is, looking at the numbers, is unrealistic to ever get to. I mean, we look at 2020, we're going to be at almost 79%.
Yeah.
So, this, you drop 50%, that's very unrealistic. But 78% is a worried number.
Because of how high, or because of the,
I think what's happened in the past, Mayor, is the town has not, it's built its reserves to 78, 80%, and they've not handled the infrastructure issues that you want. And so as I said earlier today, we have the opportunity, because we have a strong fund balance, to do some of the infrastructure. The point of the model is how far do you go?
Yeah,
And to continue, what are your options to maintain the levels you want to maintain?
Well, looking at the model, looking at that and looking at the numbers, I'd say we need to find the other resources sooner than later. Because as we look at the model, the balance is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we're going along. So either we stop growth and build back the fund balance, or we find some resource to start paying for this stuff, because we can't keep writing checks.
That's right, yeah, and again, if you fast forward to, I don't know when you typically start your budget process for the next year, but going back to the point of, our base year for these numbers is the fiscal 22 budgeted numbers, and so if those are coming in stronger, which that's the expectation, just by kind of getting a better read on those numbers and fine tuning those, that's going to help some of this as well, because our starting point's going to be better.
Even if we got another $1 million in, so instead of being 80%,
Right.
we'll be at 69%, which I still think is too high, to be honest.
And part and parcel with all this is that your capital projects, and I don't think this is the meeting to look at all your other capital projects out there, fiscal 23 and beyond, but we have a number of those turned on, and so y'all may look at those inevitably during the course of a year. Amounts are going to change on those, priorities going to change, so you may be shifting some of those out naturally. The need may go away too, and so that's hopefully the benefit you see in this model is it's dynamic, and as you get in new data, we're going to update it in here, and we can
Well,
see what the
to
impact
me,
is.
this is very useful right here.
Absolutely. That 50.5%, that's based on the 2022 budget, correct? So that's a good number.
That's right. That's assuming that, again, you all use the 2 million or so that you've appropriated, and your revenues come in as budgeted, your expenditures come in as budgeted. If all that happened, and it's not going to happen exactly like that, but you would be left with 4.6 million, just under 4.7 at the end of fiscal 22.
So could you plug in, like, under the unassigned fund balance, could you plug in like 5.1 million?
In terms of to see what that would equal from a,
So if you had a good year and
Yeah.
revenues were higher, rather
Yes.
than being 4.6, make it 5.1?
You want to see what the percentage would be?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so go into.
$500,000?
What I would do is go into, and we can do it a couple different ways. Quickly, Chezo, I would just, we
Or
can
if it's
do it
too
that way.
time consuming,
No,
that's
no,
fine.
no, not at all. And this is where
Just look at it.
we can show you with this, and I could go into the individual revenue assumptions and tinker with the growth assumptions there for that year. This is a quick and easy way to do it. What Chezo's doing is he's putting in a one-time revenue of 400,000. It's getting us to the same spot versus the longer way of looking at different growth assumptions. And so that's what that 5.1 million.
So you'd be at 54.9.
So it went up about 3.5%,
Right.
So if you outperformed your budget by $400,000,
right?
that's what the resulting picture would be. And that has a follow-through effect on the rest of the years as well. Now, again, as a reminder for this one, this scenario, we're assuming you capture all of an estimated 30% increase in your one-time reassessment there. And so that's,
Yeah, that's
obviously-
a very key.
yeah, that's a huge
Because-
piece of this.
because even if they reassess, the tax is still a year behind. So we wouldn't see that tax money until 2023.
Right.
That's on,
and
that's on a reassessment.
I know, I realize
But
that.
on, what we're talking about is the sales from last year will be on this next scroll. And we're being told it's substantial.
Yeah, but it usually runs,
It'll be in the next.
it would be in this next.
It'll be in the next
tax
but it
bill.
won't be a reassessment. Watauga reassesses in '22. We'll see that globally. Every property will be reassessed. What we're speaking of is only the ones that have been sold in this last scenario, then what the increase is.
Now, I also realize that which I totally agree with, we're underestimating revenue.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Well,
that,
we're conservatively
well,
estimating,
right,
yeah.
which I think we should do.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but
This-
I think we have to I mean, the more you look at this, the more you have to realize that we have to find different ways
It's
of.
not sustainable.
Yeah, we can't keep writing checks, it's never gonna happen.
Well, a couple things have to happen, Mayor. We have to be able to see ahead more than one fiscal year. Because we can make one fiscal year look really good. Either don't do capital and your fund balance goes up, particularly if you have a good revenue year. Or vice versa, you can spend a lot of capital in a year and see your fund balance goes down. So this model allows us to look out multiple years, look for trends, have a plan in place for the taxpayer so that we know how we're going to fund all this infrastructure, improvements, operations, water reservoirs, things like that. And then actually sit down and come up with a plan on how to make that happen, as opposed to just flying by the seat of our pants
So
and saying, let's try this, let's do this. This model will allow us to, in every year, it's going to get more precise. We're not going to show this to you just next year at the same time. As we go through this budget, Steve and Daniel and I will be updating this model. Not real time, but as we see the revenues, as we see the expenditures, as we get a capital project that you've approved and it comes in under budget, or God forbid over budget. So very dynamic, and we'll be able to manipulate this at will, which is the benefit of it, so that we'll be able to, when we give you financial reports, more importantly, when we talk about the future, we've got some basis to talk about as opposed to just what we think.
So if you had, I would look at this as maybe a 3 to 5 year long-term planning tool. That if you had some significant CIPs that the town needed to invest in, and if you get down to whatever the percentage is, your expenditures would somewhat be flat while you grow your general fund, and then be able to look at the model and say, okay, in 3 years, now again, that's according to what, that current council and then that council wants to do, but at least it'd be a tool that you knew what funding would be available to fund these projects.
Well, I agree. We always talk about future councils can change everything, but let me ask you as a council, would it not have been to your benefit to come in here as a council and have a 3 to 5 year plan, well thought out by somebody, and funding and projections, so that you didn't have to start from scratch every time? And I think future councils, given this tool and this planning piece, are going to be able to do the same thing. Yes, they can change anything they want. We understand that. But I think if I was sitting up there in your shoes, I would like to see that plan that someone put the effort into to project out 3 to 5 years, so you had something to work with, and then make those dynamic decisions about, well, we can't afford to do that now. It may have been a good idea in 2021, but now it's not a good idea. I understand that. But up until, this fiscal year, I couldn't find a plan in place for me as the manager to say how we're going to do all these things that we talk about going forward. So for the next council, the next manager, the next finance people, the next utility director, we need to provide them a plan on what we were thinking about, and let them adjust it, but not start from scratch.
I like that it's dynamic, so future councils can add in or take out and be able to see real time the benefits or the non-benefits of decisions that they're going to make.
The town owns this program, correct? This model?
Yes, sir.
So then where do you guys, what role
Where do
do
we
you
fit in?
play moving forward?
We can do, we have a lot of different setups with a lot of our clients. We're really on call for you all to say, Steve and Bob will call and say, hey, we've got some updated revenues and expenditures. Can you drop those in and work through a few different scenarios with us? They can certainly do it on their own. Steve and Bob have been playing with them, Daniel. But we're always at your, if you call on us, we can update that. I think part of what we would look at is talking about, well, what should our unassigned fund balance percentage be when we're looking at certain projects, and this will come into play on the water and sewer side, actually can come into play on the general fund side as well. How do you fund those projects? Should I do everything on a pay-as-you-go basis, or should some of these projects, should I flip them to debt And if they're debt, what's the best way to fund those? And I think it's that sort of advice that we would give you to say, or at least give you the different options that are out there to consider. And so we're really, while this is your model, and you can take it and use us and never call us again, we want you to call us and we can talk through different options, and always happy to update the model too as we go.
Up to this point, we've not had a living, breathing document, have we? It's ongoing and working.
I could not find one.
Okay.
What did you plug in on 2026 that the water and sewer is going to be 128,000
Yep.
short on cash?
So you'll see, that's a good segue on the water and sewer side, is that you'll see that cash balance of 1.4 million estimated at the end of 2021. We have 800,000 turned on this year, and then a couple $100,000 turned on the next few years. If you go to that CIP and you scroll over, and then if we looked up a little bit into water and sewer, there's 107,000 per year projected out. If you go to the left, Chezo, what is that? That's just taps replacement on an annual basis going forward. There's not a whole lot else turned on. In 23 and 24, you'll see some of those other projects that are out there. There's not a whole lot else turned on in there, but if you use 800,000 right out of the gate, then obviously you're going to drop from that 1.4 to the 600,000 because your budgeted revenues and expenditures on an operating side match up and cancel each other out, and so that's where that one-time drop is. And then you'll see that drop going forward of a couple $100,000 a year tied to that 100,000 taps replacement. One thing we don't have turned on in the rate side, much like we turned on a one-time 30% increase in general fund revenues, if we looked at, for instance, increasing that your base rates by 3.5% for the next 2 years as well, 23 and 24. So a flat 3.5% across the board. It may have caught your eye that for instance, the water residential, what that does to the base rate with a 3.5% increase. That helps some when we go back to your dashboard tab. You'll see it brings you back positive. It's still pretty low. In terms of the dollar balance and converting that to a day's cash, or if you look at it on a monthly basis, that's very tight. And so that's not something, again, much like on your general fund side, I would say I don't want that picture. If this was me, I'd like something higher, whether that minimum is 120 days or 180 days, but there's ways to get that same thing. Look at a higher rate increase, or your just revenues naturally come in higher because again we're using your budgeted figures, decrease expenditures somehow, or turn off some of that capital, delay some of the capital. We haven't even turned on some of the bigger projects that you talked about as well, but we can look at that.
Those projects we're getting them funded from outside sources.
Well, we're borrowing, we're assuming debt for those water and sewer SRF.
Is the debt in there?
We have your current SRF that's in process. If you scroll out to your existing debt, we do have that one. Keep scrolling out, Chaz. I think that's those two, while they're called Series 2020, those are your two loans in there of roughly $4 million.
Those are water sewer. So the one we have before SRF right now, if that gets approved, we'll plug that into the model and then we'll see that. Mayor, to answer your question on that 800,000, as we talked about last year and this year, we funded equipment and personnel to replace service lines. So that 105,000 that went across every year for service line replacement, that's actually the materials to make that happen. So these 2 years, capital, we've asked you to fund that project, and then we'll carry it through till the end as we replace service lines on that system. So that's where that money is going.
We've also projected a rate increase on water for the next 5 years, I believe.
That was the 3.5% that he was talking about.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Did we go across the board at 3.5%, or did we?
We assumed that it was scheduled through 2022, I believe.
Yes.
So that's part of the discussion we need to have is As you can see, that 3.5% really doesn't cover the need. And so as we, either this fee schedule or as we go forward, or as we look at the numbers 6 months from now, we need to be able to dynamically adjust that to keep that utility liquid. And, you know, the numbers they're really low, getting low. So that 3.5% probably is not going to be sufficient going forward. And we talked about, you know, we can raise the growth rate, we can reduce capital, we can have additional revenue that we're not projected. It's really going to turn out to be a combination of all of that. We're going to have to manage the capital, obviously. We're going to have to look at our growth rate on rates, and we're going to have to anticipate revenue, additional revenue.
Because I think when, was it last year or the year before, we projected rate increases every year or every, Daniel?
Yes, that's in the previous CIP model.
Yeah,
There was an expectation completely through that model of rate escalation. They just added that in just a few minutes ago. I think you all put in a few years of that, is that correct?
Through 24.
Through 24, so of course the numbers change if we continue that escalation. But it was in that previous model.
and was it a 3.5% increase or?
It was this year, yes.
That was just on your base? Just on your
Yes.
base rate?
Yeah.
Yeah, just on the base rate.
All right.
You know, in addition, I've mentioned this before, looking at everything right now is turned on as on a pay-as-you-go basis. If you wanted to flip certain things to debt, you always have, well, not always, but you have that option for certain types of projects. Not every project is a good fit for debt. You know, in North Carolina, there's a couple of main ways to finance things. The first is a general obligation bond, requires voter approval. The second is what's an installment financing, like y'all have done before. Doesn't require voter approval, just town council approval, but you have to put a lien on an asset. But that's a very common way to do things. And then the third is a revenue bond, typically like a water and sewer, where you're pledging a revenue. You're not putting a lien on the asset. That's not voter approved. It's specific revenue that you're pledging. And so right now, all of those projects are turned on as debt. You know, one thing that's pretty easy to finance are vehicles and equipment. There's a lot of lenders out there that'll do that, and so that you can imagine takes a one-time hit in spreading that out over a 5-year, for instance, if you did it over a 5-year period. And so you can look at right now out in 2024, we have turned on a new fire tanker at a cost of $900,000. That's a big one-time expense. So that's something that you all could easily finance. And if you wanted to look at it and see what that did, if you go back to your dashboard tab real quick before, Cheza, we do that just to see what our starting point is in 24, you'll see how that drops pretty precipitously in that year, largely driven by that $900,000.
I'm sure it will.
If we turn that on to debt, and the way we do this in the model is we tell the model, don't fund it as cash, fund it as debt. And then we turn that debt assumption on in the model. We have this one turned on, and we can look at different assumptions, but assume you finance $900,000 in fiscal year 2024. So you're going to start paying for it in fiscal 25, principal and interest. And just for starters, if you did that over a 15-year period, which may be stretching the useful life of that asset, but you can look at it over, change it to 10 years, and we can see 10 years at a 3% interest rate. First of all, we can tell you what that means in terms of total interest. If you go to we have a proposed debt service tab, and you'll see, if you blow that up, $900,000 over 10 years at a 3% interest rate, you're going to pay $155,000 in interest. And that annual cost is $105,000. So instead of a one-time hit of $900,000, you're going to have 10-year hit of $105,000. But it helps, again, not see that one-time drop. If you go back to our dashboard tab, we've got, you can see that helps that picture. You still see a little bit of drop because we have other projects turned on, but not as dramatic of a drop. And so when we look at different projects to fund, vehicles and equipment are pretty easy on the water and sewer side. y'all haven't done a revenue bond where you're pledging revenue. You have some SRF loans out there and you've done installment financings. And so y'all can continue to do installment financings on certain projects on the water and sewer side. What you would want to be careful with, and this is a little bit more forward thinking, if you've got a really big project like a $10 million project out there, if you're doing all kinds of, at some point, I should say before I say that, at some point the local government commission is going to say, instead of just doing installment financings and leaning up your system all over the place, y'all really should convert to a revenue bond structure where you're pledging the revenues of the water and sewer system. That requires some additional things like a rate covenant, like you all, as a part of that process, will say the town has a covenant to set rates at whatever level is necessary to hit a minimum threshold. And we can talk about kind of what that minimum threshold would be, but you have a rate covenant. You have what's called an additional bonds test, which basically says you have to have a certain level of revenues that can support additional borrowings down the road. So there's these various metrics that are put into a revenue bond structure, or things that you have to hit to borrow more money. You see that with bigger entities that have a lot of water and sewer utility projects. They eventually convert to a revenue bond structure because it's really, from a lender's perspective, from the LGC's perspective, and frankly from y'all's as well, it's a way to ensure that water and sewer, you're setting rates to cover water and sewer projects. It's self-sustaining. You're not pulling from your general fund to do it. And so it's a way to kind of put some constraints around you all that, not you specifically, but on a going forward basis, that you have to set rates to support your system. There's no fine, there's no clear cut, once you get to this level of debt, you have to convert. It's more of a know it when you see it, and it's a discussion with the LGC staff. But, you know, if you have a $10 million project, that may be something that you start to talk about and say, hey, it's time to convert to a revenue bond structure. Because what also may be hard is if you're doing $10 million for a reservoir project, you know, putting a lien on a reservoir is a little tough, awkward. And so some lenders are friendly and will say, you know, I'm okay with that because I know I'm never going to foreclose on the reservoir. I just trust you're going to pay it. And so some lenders are really familiar with North Carolina financings. They know the LGC's there. They're going to step in if y'all haven't appropriated to pay that debt service. But you get to that level where it may make sense to start doing a revenue bond structure down the road. Not a decision you have to make today. The only, I got to that point though, thinking about if you decided to fund some of those other projects with debt on an installment financing basis, if you ever converted to a revenue bond structure, you have to basically refinance all your other debt because a lender's not going to lend to you based on revenues if other lenders have liens on your system. So it's more of that's kind of a broader conversation to have down the road once you start to get into those bigger projects that are potentially out there, and we can look at them.
Do me a favor, can you put back the EMS at 425,000? And where does our percentage go as far as from our general balance?
Right. So that's that 425, and we have that turned on, Chazzo, per year.
Yeah, it's per year.
Yeah, and actually, you know what's why I was confused? We have the $400,000. That's just a one-time jump there.
Take that out.
Yeah, if you turn that one off. So the operating expense 425 per year. Go back over, Chazzo, to your dashboard. Yeah, so while I'm looking at that, I'm thinking this is where we can dig in the model. On an ongoing basis, I guess with that one-time 30% increase, that is enough to really sustain that 425 per year, right? I'm looking at our, so yeah, I mean, that's that one-time 30% increase. Yeah, if you took that out, $1.2 million. So that alone is enough to cover clearly the 400,000. You have some other capital, which is why that still drops. But I was expecting, if you change that back to 1%, I was expecting to see it go, you know, it's going to go down each and every year because it's not, you know, based on no growth in your revenue, operating revenues and operating expenses basically matching. You're going to see that. But I'm trying to keep track of the different things we have turned on. So if you go back to 30%, Chazzo.
Are you talking about 23?
Yeah. Well, that that's if we, well, hopefully we see the 30%.
And it could be less, could be more. The beauty is, Mayor, we'll be able to update this as we see it.
Well,
We get the tax scroll, we'll know. And then assuming Rebecca does her magic and collects 99%, we can factor that in.
And not to say, I just want to point out one thing in the motto, because I'm looking right at it in column 12 there. If down the road you wanted to look at, hey, what would a property tax increase, what would that do for me? You can plug in the number of pennies you're looking at, and if you put in 2 pennies or something there, you can see what that does to your revenue stream. We've got your value of a penny loaded up and kind of what that would do and equal going forward. And so that's another feature to try to give you full functionality and look at different revenue streams or impacts there. You've got that in there. If you have more of a one-time revenue coming in, that's where that operating impacts tab would come into play, because we can, while we can do something that's recurring annually, we can also do something that's a one-time revenue or expense as well. And so we can turn something on and say, yep, we're going to get it in. It's just going to be in 1 year and put that in a given year.
well,
So the goal is to, and we do a lot of this where we're in, workshops, work sessions, or even in full council meetings like this, and we're pulling this up and y'all are hitting us with scenarios, and we then go back and forth and say, all right, in the CIP, let's turn those projects off, or let's turn them on, shift them out. The ultimate goal being to try to, able to run through as many different scenarios as y'all can think of live, so it's not, hey, thanks for that, let us run it, we'll be back to you in a couple of weeks at your next meeting. You can run it live, because you may not know it till you see it and want to look at some different options out there.
well, as far as I can see is that we have to find other sources. We can't keep writing checks. There's no way we can be around 70, 80, 80% expenditures on capital debt. I mean, there's no way. I mean, you can raise as much as you want, you're never going to get out of the red mark. I mean, we are a small town and we have so much revenue we can generate from our residents. I mean, our property taxes, I don't think anybody's got that willpower to do that. So, the only place we have to figure out is where can we get the money?
If you looking at your different revenue streams, as you would expect, the property tax is your biggest one, so that's your most sensitivity there. If you go to that general fund income statement, while we have every one loaded up, there are certain ones that are going to be most impactful, as you would expect.
Why is your
Yeah.
growth at a minus?
Historically, it's just tracking what it actually was, and so those estimates in 21, we haven't dropped all your 21 figures in. We just went straight to.
Well, let's look at 2022. You're looking at a growth of a minus 7.2%.
Well, your budget is $255,000 for utility franchise tax. I think in 21, I think we were using budgeted figures there as well, Steve. It might have been 275.
So it's just looking at that one revenue
Yeah.
is down 7%.
The 275, Mayor, compared to the 255 is where that difference is. And that's projected.
But that local option sales tax, and that's a big ticket item. And so right now you can see very conservative 1% growth. If you wanted to look at, hey, let's say it's 3% growth for the next couple of years, and then it dials back to 2% and then 1%. Obviously that's going to help the picture, and so you can go back to your dashboard and see what that does. I didn't remember what it was before, but that would help. But looking at your different revenue line items and potentially different growth assumptions, as I think I mentioned to you when I presented in January, the model is only as good as the assumptions that you have in it, and so we can tinker with all of those and look at different sensitivity to those. Same on the expenditure side. If certain things are you're coming more under pressure on certain expenditures in certain departments, we can grow those faster than others and see what happens to things out there.
And anybody got anything they like that?
Clear as mud, right?
Nice model.
It
It
is.
is a great
Yes.
model.
Great tool.
Thanks. I know, when I presented in January, it was more conceptual in nature, and talked a lot about it, showed you some screenshots from a sample model, but, this is your live model. Bob and Steve and Daniel have access to it. Again, we love jumping in it and can update it as certain things change and, as you get in new data, but it's out there. It's a tool that y'all have and can use going forward to help you look at all those.
Well,
Thanks.
it is a great tool, but I'd like to be on the conservative side rather than the aggressive side. So the surprise is that the extra comes.
Right. Surprise to the
I hate to
upside,
see, in 2022, we show 45 or 30%. All of a sudden we get a surprise, oh, wow, we really overestimated, and we go backward 72%.
Yeah.
So, the model's great, but I use the same as for the service, for the public works, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
So it's what we put in, and how accurate we put it in is really what it's going to reflect here,
Right.
which is a rude awakening, to be honest with
That's why we want to show it to you.
you. Yeah, it's good.
My anticipation there is to, at least quarterly, bring you either a dynamic one, I don't know that we'll put the TV up, but at least maybe a printout, a quarterly report as we update, as the budget goes forward. We'll update what actual revenues are to that point and actual expenditures. Because the more accurate data we put in, the better you're going to be able to see the picture. So I anticipate maybe quarterly doing that for council.
I think it's a good idea.
Great.
But also, I think all the trucks and police car, everything else we're buying in this budget, I think we have to look to finance them rather than just write a check.
If you go on that note, on the CIP side, I'm trying to think on what you in the 2022 year, you have a handful of items out there that you could, just looking at your trucks, equipment, things like that you could go and do a financing for. Interest rate environment is still very, very good, especially if you're looking at, like a 5-year financing like this. You would be definitely below 1.5% on something like that now. And so that interest cost, may be fairly minimal to you all to spread that out over 5 years versus all in one. But that's, again, something y'all can think about.
I definitely would recommend that.
What would be, I think there's about 220 in the water side financing. If we reduce that it was 880, if that pay as you go down to 685 and 220, well, I didn't exactly get those numbers.
Well, if you finance 220, yeah, and we did that. So Chazzo, if you went on and turned on an installment financing, you don't have to name the project, but just turn on a new installment financing for $220,000 in this fiscal year.
You can turn off the tanker.
And we'd have that be out of the water and sewer fund. And if you did that, Steve, over I don't know what project, I haven't looked at your list of projects, but 5 years, or you could do it 10, or we could think about what that is, and you scroll over to the right, you're going to see that is going to help our numbers. That helped your cash. Instead of going down to 600,000 and went down to 800,000, still goes down a little bit further. Do we still have the 3.5% turn on?
Yes.
What does that picture looks? That picture looks a little bit.
So what you want, 4% increase in?
Well, not in 22. Keep it at 3.5% there. Yeah, this next couple of years, 4. That's good. And if you go, that brought it up a little bit.
Not that much.
Yeah.
Didn't do very much.
Well, the idea is to get some sort of rate that we can put into the fee schedule, have for you. I don't know, Bob, you want to do that now or June meeting?
Well, it's gonna have to be in the June
Right.
meeting. We don't know what rate to propose until we have today's meeting and we can plug in some numbers.
So you just want to play with that,
Yeah.
and that's covered.
I mean, Mayor, we can finance that, Stephen and I talked about that. And then we'll bring you we'll have to work the model and bring you a rate.
And recall as well, I believe you just turned everything on, right?
Everything is turned on,
So
that's right.
The budget that we propose is not necessarily this same picture, so.
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this year, the 22, all
Right.
those things are on, the 800,
Okay.
On the utility, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, that number's on.
all those are on. And that's all that's there, should be. Okay.
You got the F-550 pickup, I mean, that truck, that 90,000, that can be financed.
It was about $220,000, right?
Roughly, that's
Of finance, that we can finance.
Of equipment
Equipment.
and the vehicles equipment.
And if that's council's desire, we'll move in that direction.
I have no question.
I think
I
that
don't
makes sense.
think anybody would object to that.
What are you paying on interest on 220,000, Chaz, if you go to the,
I think you put 1.5. Oh,
so you pay about a whopping, $10,000 in interest over 5 years at a 1.5% interest rate. To give you a little bit more cushion.
And I just spent 220. I'd pay 10 this time to pay 220.
Mayor, we'll do that. We'll move in that direction.
Yeah. All right, anybody have anything else they'd like to throw in there?
Doesn't give us lottery numbers, does it?
Wouldn't that be awesome?
If it did, he wouldn't be.
Yes.
No, in all seriousness, it's a great tool.
Anything that I didn't cover that you?
What,
Okay.
I mean, with the parking lot revenue,
We haven't projected that.
any of that change?
Well, it would, but I think our first, well, it depends how we get it paid for. The TDA funds it, the revenue would be, if we could show that right away. If we have to use any general fund money, we'd have to offset the cost and the return on the investment. As that goes forward, obviously it gets put in the model.
Yeah.
Everything we do gets put in the model so that we can turn it on or off and see what it means and look to, how's it going to be funded.
Sure.
Your TDA projects are in the model,
Mhm.
but we show grants is how the model shows it, from TDA to offset that. So every project and cost, and it goes in here, as well as the revenues that may or may not offset that. So on the parking lot, if TDA funds a parking lot, then it will be in the model.
Yeah.
And then if there's revenue associated with that doesn't have to, pay any debt, it will show in the revenue stream.
Sure.
And things like that will improve, obviously, as we go forward.
Oh, yeah.
Those are additional revenues that the mayor speaks about that we need to investigate and
Yes, sir.
define.
And what about worst case scenario with the ad valorem taxes with Watauga County, if they were to be switched up?
On the sales tax,
Yeah.
well, that's a substantial number in the budget. We can, the model allows you to do the what if.
Yeah.
You don't lose it all. You go to a different methodology, so you lose a substantial portion of it.
Exactly.
And that's why that issue is becoming very important to the town of Beech Mountain and why we've been defending it.
Oh, absolutely.
But yes, to answer your question, you can go in, Steve can go in and
see-
move that around.
See the worst case scenario.
Well, Bob and Daniel do, we would mess with it too, but Steve's the one that we've got trained up. Mayor, I think that's all I've got. Unless council's got questions on the model, or you want us to do some what-ifs. You've given me enough direction to finalize the budget and have it to you. I'd like to get it to you the first of next week, the final version, and post it on the internet. It'll take me a little bit more time to get the fee schedule, and then have it prepared for you well before the June 8th meeting.
We definitely have to look at the fee schedule. And I'd like to look at a schedule, how to fund the EMS. I'm sure that the residents would appreciate it, but I think we all have to participate in supporting it. I just don't think the town should just be writing checks for it, personally. So I think we should have to come up with either some kind of fee schedule on that.
Okay.
That make, that we can,
Can you give me just a little direction on, you want it 100% costed as a fee? Do you want 50%? You want?
well, I guess the only way I can decide that is how much, we don't know what percentage that gentleman wants to participate in.
Well,
Is it a one-time shot?
It's one time.
Okay, so then the rest of the time, it's,
So if we were gonna put a fee in for EMS, at what level would you
We're a
want?
baseline, start at 50%, just see what it looks like. The town
I'll go with that.
foots 50%, just as a
That's what
baseline.
I need. I just need some
Yeah, I'd
direction.
go- I'd
I
go
think
with
that's
that.
reasonable.
Yeah, I'd go with that,
Okay,
with the 50%.
we'll do that.
So we can see. But also, I think we have to, I don't know, it'll be you or somebody else, but we have to start looking at other sources, especially if we're gonna look at spend $10 million on the water project. I mean, we need to have that in hand before we start spending thousands and thousands of dollars.
Well, obviously, we'll have to finance
Well,
it.
yeah, well, I understand that, but the
the
point is
question
is
would
how
be-
we finance it.
Well, and that's David's expertise. If we want him to work on that for us.
Well, somewhere down the line, I think it has to be worked out. I mean,
No, I agree, and actually, that's how we started this whole discussion about 8 months ago, was we reached out and said, look, we've got a $20 million project is what we were talking about, and what are our options to raise capital to pay for that? And that's how we, started this relationship. So now we've got, I believe, our finances are very clear. We know where we are, where we're going.
Right.
We have the ability to project. Now it's time to say, the next step is looking at these long-term debt. I mean, to us, $10 million is a big debt. It may not be big for other people, but for this town, it is. We need to now move into the realm of what's the best way to fund that. And unless you want me to look somewhere else, first try on Mr. Cheatwood. He's the expert that I feel comfortable with in leading us on that discussion, if you all.
Well, I think we have to have it for previous councils. Council's gonna be coming in, once you start talking about, once you got all the engineering and everything else in an estimate, I think for the next council to be able to make a logical, response to yay or nay, they would have to have that,
How do we pay for it?
that portion with it.
Right.
I mean, we here are giving you the go-ahead to get to start, but the next council's gotta have that part plus how it's gonna get paid for.
Well, for future councils, it sure will be nice to have the history.
But we'll produce a plan.
Yeah.
It shouldn't shock anybody, but this is well beyond my capability of this level of
It's a
expertise.
big shock.
Yeah, it is for me. But that's why we brought in the experts to do this and get us on a good footing. And I think logically, if it's okay with council, we'll proceed into the next step.
I agree.
Yeah,
Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
yes.
Steve, did I miss anything? Is there anything you need before we leave here?
No, I don't think so.
Because next time we'll see you is June 8th, and we'll have all the documents
And we'll have
prepared.
an audience.
We'll clean that up for you and have it prepared for you. Do you need anything?
No.
Me?
I'm great.
I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me.
Okay, thank you very much for coming.
I was thinking 30, just
All right, I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion.
All
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.